Welcome back. We have just finished building our first and running our first regression pipeline. Let's see what we can do about including those categorical variables in this run. Now, one thing to note is our insurance data set is pretty small. It just has 1,338 rows in it. One thing that we may introduce in here before we even select columns or anything like that is the partition and sample. Now, we went over that in the data prep, but the partition and sample, in particular the sampling one, allows you to downsample a data set to a more reasonable number of instances. So for the most part, there's no reason to bring in more than 10 to 20,000 instances for the types of models we'll be building in this course. So that's just something to keep in mind. The next thing is this split data and score model. Now, if you remember building your MLR in Excel, you used the entire data set, which I believe happened to have 1,000 rows of data in it. So a way you could have done that and simulated this type of split data approach would have been to only select the first 750 rows of data for your regression equation, but then use that regression equation and those coefficients that you came up with to calculate your predicted value for all 1,000. And that way you could take a look at those last 250 and see what your performance was on that quote unquote holdout data. Now, even better would have been to add a random sort to your data, because there could be something to the sequence of data in a data set that has something to do with its properties, its predictive properties. All right. So anyway, back to this data set. So we took the first time around, we selected columns, and we only selected those 3 numeric features and the numeric label. Let's just say we'll say all columns, and we'll send them all through. We'll split the data, train the model, again, making sure it knows charges is our label. So that's the only change we're going to make. We're going to include our categorical attributes in our modeling efforts and see what happens. All right, so I'm going to submit this job. And we'll come back when it's finished running. Okay, we're done running, and I just noticed one of the things I did not do was update the node name for this to say that we're selecting all of the columns, but I could go back and fix that. All right, so we've scored the model. Let's take a look and see what our scored data set looks like. Okay, so now we have age, sex, BMI, children, smoker, region, charges, and the scored labels. Okay, good. What does our trained model look like? Well, again, it's just that set of instructions that we had. So let's look at our evaluate model and see how it did. And we can see that the coefficient of determination went up to 0.74. And if you recall from working with the Excel linear regression, that was probably due mainly to the smoker attribute. And we were able to improve all of our other scores as well. All right, so we now have 2 different models that we can work with. And one thing that you notice is, wait a minute. My scored data set still just shows sex as male and female, region as a name, smoker as yes and no. I don't see any dummy variables in there. Well, what happens is Azure ML actually automatically creates these dummy variables for you and runs the regression and then recombines them into the original data set for display purposes. So we can see our scored label, and the scored labels are closer in this case than they were in the first case, but we don't see the dummy variables or which region. We'll take a look and see how we can maybe explore that a little bit more going forward. You'll also notice we didn't do anything to normalize our numeric features. That is also handled automatically by Azure Machine Learning. It takes all the numeric features and applies a standard normalization technique to them during the modeling process, and then reconverts that back into the original numbers for us when we see the results. So a lot of what we do, a lot of the grunt work we do to get data ready is handled automatically by the modeling tool itself, so that we can focus more on our modeling results than on the data prep. And we're seeing more and more of that take place in the tools that we have at our disposal, and we'll see more and more of it going forward. All right, so that's it for this video. Let's get back to the reading module and see what we would like to do next.